quorum, and I call this meeting of Policies and Priorities Committee to order. First item is to adopt the agenda. It's been moved by, let me figure this one out, by Councillor Lane and seconded by Councillor Durley, that the agenda for the August 25th, 2014 regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adopted. Comments, questions, changes? All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are any councillors in a position of conflict of interest?
I see none.
Okay. Therefore, moving on to new business, it has been moved by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King that the issue summary report municipal drain request at 1941 Balfour Street be received, and that committee recommend to council that the petition for drainage works Form 1 be accepted for the creation of a municipal drain to serve and relieve flooding at 1941 Balfour Street, and that a drainage engineer be appointed to prepare a report and oversee any works recommended by his report in accordance with the Drainage Act. Report, I just need to find it here. That's it, thank you. Questions, comments, discussion with regard to the report? I see Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I read this report, as I read it and as I understand it, and the recommendation that's here, is that if this recommendation is to be voted on and go ahead, that this municipal drain could take in the neighborhood of 5 years to be constructed. Is that correct?
Mr. CEO, I believe Mr. Mantle answers that, does he? Thank you.
Yeah, I can provide some insight. The drainage superintendent is also here, but it takes some time to create a municipal drain. It doesn't just happen overnight. There's a process to work through. Again, it's the appointment of a drainage engineer to provide the engineer's report, which is then accepted by council, and council then will decide to proceed with the process at that point. So again, timelines vary depending on the complexity and the availability of drainage engineers to complete the project.
Councillor Lane?
Yeah, well, that's fine, but when I'm reading this background and when I'm reading everything that it's saying with the engineering, the construction, and everything, that it could take 1 to 5 years. And I know for a fact that these people have been through hell and back with the situation on their particular property, and I think to ask someone to wait an additional 5 years possibly is a little bit much, considering the kind of weather that we've had and what's been going on. So the only way I could support anything here would be that we can get some short timeline to get a report, and then that we could at least come back and say, okay, we don't want to wait for the duration and we need to get some action now. I mean, this is ridiculous. I've been to this property more than once. I've seen the entire road underwater more than once, and I just don't think that what I'm seeing here, waiting all this time to do all this engineering is in my opinion, at least acceptable. So I would like to see something, some kind of more definitive timelines.
Thank you. Mr. Mantle, is that timeline flexible? I understand that there's some process indicated by law, and I don't know what is and isn't.
That's correct. I could let the drainage superintendent speak to that, if you don't mind.
By all means. Welcome.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That ballpark figure of 1 to 5 years is kind of an estimate between what some of the engineers are saying with their availability. You have the appeal processes as well for people to appeal their costs and everything. And then also the time to construct within that. That's, 1 year turnaround is extremely conservative. I've yet to see, speaking to many drainage superintendents, any report that is turned around in a year. I know it's difficult to put that into perspective when you consider other engineering reports for a water main or a sewer can be done, within 6 months sometimes. It's kind of hard to grasp how that is, but that Drainage Act process is there for, a reason so that it's fair because it's a user pay system. So getting those costs properly assessed to each one of the landowners, it takes some considerable time, and that's really what gets appealed is people being happy with how much they have to pay for a drain that some of them, don't really want. So it's a difficult process, and the appeal process could drag it out. We could, get lucky and hit an engineer who doesn't have any other reports to do, and he can turn it around in a relatively short time. Then again, if anybody in the area wants to drag it out through tribunals, they have 3 different processes to appeal, which could drag it on. And if I could just draw your attention to the alternative is, again, it's up to council to make that decision, is to go ahead with construction and then hire an engineer to incorporate that into a municipal drain. So, there is an alternative to go ahead and make it happen right away. However, the cost for construction is not recoverable, but once it is a municipal drain, the maintenance of that drain can be recoverable in the future by billing the properties.
Thank you. Councillor Lane, anything to follow up?
Well, I appreciate your answer, and thank you very much, but at the end of the day, it still sounds to me like this is a process that certainly is not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years, and it's going to happen sometime down the road. And meanwhile, these people continue to get flooded out year after year. And the surrounding area don't have an issue, right?
Yes.
And so they would probably be inclined to hold this up if it's going to cost them money at the end of the day.
Yes.
I thank you.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Papp, anything to say?
I guess through you to Mr. Bano, to the drains. So when you said about the alternative, just in my own simple mind, is that we go ahead with the construction of a drain that would ultimately become our municipal drain, right?
Correct.
And then we would have to ensure that from an engineering design point that it met all the requirements.
Exactly.
Is that where I'm understanding?
Yes.
As opposed to the flip side of that is what you're saying is going through this process of getting the report, doing the assessment, come back. Could be 2 years, could be 3 years, and the problem persists.
Exactly.
So we have to, I guess, somehow, if it is such an issue, which it is, then we can give direction to staff to proceed with the construction. Or what is being recommended here is we go through the process. And I kind of tend to agree with Councillor Lane on this, that I would rather see us somehow expedite this in the most, best way possible, so we relieve the owners and that they see some end in sight on how this is going to happen. Well, the reverse of that is we pull the trigger and just say, build it. Is that what I'm hearing?
In essence, through you, Mr. Chair, I did speak to a young engineer who said,
Right.
If I could get him the drainage area, that he could relatively quickly just size a pipe for us that would be engineered to hold that, and then he could follow up with a report after the fact. That way it could speed up the process a lot quicker.
Okay, I'll stop there for the time being, Cap. Just
Thank you. I think I saw Mr. Mayor, and after that, John, Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some questions for the drainage superintendent, Mr. Jackson. So your experience tells you that this should be a municipal drain, right? If we could snap our fingers and turn it into one.
Yes, I believe that is the way to go. It's not, not ensuring my job or anything like that, but municipal drain is the way to go, because any agricultural lands that are affected can apply for a 1/3 grant for the municipal drain for any of the construction or maintenance that happens in the future. It's a recoverable process to the municipality. You pass a levying bylaw to borrow from the municipality for the construction or maintenance, and then that is billed out to the landowner. So it is a recoverable, it's a user pay system recoverable to the municipality. So it seems, economically practical to do that. And because it's subdivided amongst the properties by size and by their benefit, it's appropriately assessed. And usually maintenance, a maintenance program similar to Wayne Fleet is every 7 years it gets cleaned. So people aren't paying a bill every year like their taxes. They pay as it gets maintained, and depending on the maintenance, to a full clean out or a culvert replacement or just some brushing or something like that, the cost can vary and be very minimal. Like when it comes to maintenance, the costs are a lot lower than construction. So municipal drains, I believe, is a good way to go. And the maintenance of that, it becomes our responsibility, and people can rely on that.
Okay. So in the long run, Mr. Chair, I'm hearing the drainage superintendent saying, yeah, this should be a municipal drain. And once it's a municipal drain, we don't own that property, but it's privately owned, but through all the works of the Drainage Act, et cetera, there's sort of an easement there and legal allowances to allow this water to flow freely through that area. Is that essentially how it functions?
More or less, it does. It still remains, when you look at property lines, it's still part of the property for the owner. However, we do have the exclusive rights, the drainage superintendent and the engineers that are hired for that maintenance or construction to gain access to it.
Okay.
We're held accountable to the Drainage Act to maintain that. It becomes our responsibility.
Okay. Now, this, Mr. Chair, this came to light because of some acute flooding that occurred a couple of times this year at this particular property. I know we've received a number of storms, or a couple of storms, significant storms this year, but I also wondered if there was some changes in water courses, et cetera, on another property that affected this. And this is why the drainage superintendent is coming up with this as an option. Can we just hear a little bit more about that from the drainage superintendent, Mr. Chair?
By all means.
Through you, Mr.
Exactly.
Chair. I did manage to meet with the neighbors in the area, the agricultural lands that seem to be draining towards this property or affecting it. The one being the nursery that's there. I forget what the name is. I believe it's Peters. And drove around his property, and he had showed that he had hired an engineer to design that ditch that was there to control the water from his property, because he was being affected by neighboring properties as well. And we drove around and showed another piece of land that's draining to him, causing severe erosion and flooding, which actually does affect 1941 Balfour. And also to the east of his property, agricultural lands on that side are also draining towards there. So it's there's a large amount of water, especially during these, this season. There's more than just that one area being affected, but it has been directed towards that land. And because the drainage wasn't built sufficiently, it's causes some overflow that's there. The outlet that's been put in place, the culvert that crosses the road is, it's sufficient size. However, on the opposite side of the road, it has nowhere to go. It seems to go into a small drainage tile that's there, and that definitely is not a sufficient outlet. And that's what a municipal drain is for, is to provide a sufficient outlet.
Okay. Did that property owner say that he would make, the other property owner, he'd say he'd make any changes to his property, the way his lands drain, or he's just saying, too bad, so sad?
Yeah, he doesn't feel it is, going to be his responsibility, because he's affected by other properties as well. I would like to see, the whole community is affected by it, for sure, and to redirect their water that, brushes against someone else's property. I think they should take some responsibility for that, but that's just a personal opinion.
Okay. So the recommendation before us, Mr. Chair, is to start the works to turn this into a municipal drain. Councillor Lane, Councillor Papp asked about the alternative, which is, by my understanding, that we go ahead with the work. We'll probably initiate the drain process, but also go ahead with the work in the order of $50,000, which would be sort of one-time, non-recoverable costs. And then those improvements can be incorporated into the municipal drain, with future maintenance costs being assessed to property owners. So it's sort of a hybrid, saying, well, let's turn it into a municipal drain, spend some funds, we can't recover those funds, we alleviate the problem, and then that works can be incorporated in the municipal drain. Is that essentially what the alternative is, Mr. Chair?
That's as I understood it, but was it you, Mr. Jackson, that wrote the report, or Mr. Mennel?
I believe we worked in coordination
Then
together.
perhaps you can clarify that. Is your recommendation the hybrid approach of immediate construction plus municipal drainage development afterwards?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that would be my recommendation for the situation. To go with the alternative, the hybrid, as you phrased it.
And that's how we are to understand the recommendation you're making in your report.
Yes.
Okay,
Mayor,
and,
does that
and
clarify?
it helps, and then the final thing is we talked about timing. So just to go with the recommendation that was put in the report, or the one that's before us, I guess, as opposed to the hybrid option, it's, what's the timing of doing this work?
What would be the timing, Mr. Jackson? Do you know? Perhaps Mr. Mennel can answer.
It would have to be engineered first, so there's an engineering cost or design process that you work through first. The work tendered, again, timelines maybe a couple of months, maybe over winter time or into the new year.
Does that answer?
It does. I look forward to hearing from colleagues.
Councilor Gurley?
You, Mr. Chair, I'm a bit confused now. The going ahead with it right away is an alternative, as I see it, because the recommendation says hire an engineer and drainage Form 1, and this is in the planning for making a municipal drain. So, to me, there's no hybrid there. It's the recommendation is to hire an engineer, look at it, and see what we can do for it, not immediately go into the ground, because that's an alternative. Now, if we hire an engineer, what are the costs for that, and how do we recover these costs?
Mr. Jackson?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. If I could separate the two, the recommendation is, what our obligation is through legislation, through the Drainage Act, and that's why that was put as a recommendation. The alternative, is taking on the responsibility as the municipality up front, and then converting that over to a municipal drain after the fact. Now, if we go through the drainage process, those engineering fees, that's all billable that is kind of rolled into the construction of that, the municipal drain, the cost for construction, and that is the recoverable cost. The engineering fees to go with the alternative is rolled into that $50,000 that we put in as a ballpark figure. It's really, we don't know what the actual cost is going to be right now. $50,000 is, put in there as comparison to other construction projects of the same size. That engineering fee would also be, non-recoverable.
Okay, so if we spend $50,000 today to do something, it's not recoverable, and it's on private property?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other councillor?
Yeah,
Councillor Lane?
yeah, just if I might, just to point to what Councillor Durley just said, the work that we would do now to alleviate this problem in this alternative would not be on private property, would it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the outlet that is proposed right now is on the west side of the culvert that crosses the road. And you would have to put a drain tile of sufficient size through agricultural land there, which is private property, down to a natural water course.
Okay, so this is, thank you. This is getting a little more
Yeah,
complicated.
for clarification, if I may,
yeah.
Councillor Ling, for clarification, the $50,000 solution up front, as you're proposing, is the culvert plus drainage tile on private property.
I don't believe that the culvert itself.
Not the culvert?
Would have to be replaced. Just
Okay.
to put in a sufficient outlet on the west side of the road.
So the $50,000 solution is the tile on private property, which would be of sufficient capacity to accept all the water that's going there now.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And it's a maximum of 50,000, something less than that.
I believe in the report I had put plus or minus, so it's,
so it's-
it could be in and around that $50,000 mark. Could be over, could be under. It just depends on the size of the pipe and the method of installation.
Councillor Ling?
Yeah, now I'm more confused than I was before, because now we're gonna put tiles on people's property that's private, but we're not gonna do anything with what goes underneath the road, which is what has to be also dealt with. Because if you just put tiles on someone's property, where's the water gonna go? It's not gonna go across the road, right? Because the culvert across the road, as I understand it, is too small anyhow.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Right now, the cross culvert would be, it could be incorporated in that municipal drain. That flow is still gonna go there. It's still gonna go under Balfour Street to the west side. And that tile is put in on that west side to take that water. Just preliminary looking at it, the culvert could be the appropriate size. However, it doesn't go anywhere after that, and that's causing that backup. That flow is not continuous, and it's trying to outlay into a 6-inch tile that is already existing. The farmer does have the opportunity to also tile his land and connect to that header pipe at any time. That's a benefit to him as well, to keep his land even drier, to improve the drainage on his land and have better productivity. There's a lot more kind of tied into it, a lot more that can be done with it. This is just, trying to deal with that flooding issue. For one, safety. When that road gets flooded, it's a danger. It's going to cause issues with having to repair the road. It's definitely causing property damage to the owners that are right at 1941 Balfour. So the alternative is to try and, relieve that situation as quickly as possible. And the municipal drainage process is, what I was recommending. It should be a municipal drain after that so that we can maintain it.
Councillor Ling?
Well, no, I mean, that's,
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned, this thing's gotta be, it should be done, and that my opinion is that I would support something that gets some action now,
Okay.
rather than.
Let's see what other councillors may have to comment. Any? I guess I have one, just for clarification, and that's, so we put the tile onto private property, it becomes a municipal drain. We are then able to maintain the tile bed or the tile route that goes in there as required?
Mr. Chair, essentially, you would do it. A lot of the tile drain doesn't need a heck of a lot of maintenance just because of the system that's there. Usually the lifespan is about 50 years for that, and it gets replaced later on. Another tile gets put in next to it, or you can remove and replace in the exact same spot. Being a municipal drain, it's a recoverable cost at that time. You can clean it, by blowing it out with water, pressurized water to do that. It's inlet you have to maintain, it's outlet you have to maintain, and depending on how much of the system you want to incorporate, we can incorporate the culvert that's there already on Balfour, the ditching that runs along the property. There's, you could add branches to it. Once you open it up as a municipal drain and a report is done, they can evaluate it even larger to see if more improvement needs to be done and more can be added to that system. And at that time, you can have other residents in the area that may require drainage as well. So it definitely is a plus to move along with it.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm understanding from this, and perhaps councillors will correct me if I'm wrong, we actually are being asked to consider one of a variety of options. One is, I guess, the drainage, the municipal drainage option of getting that looked after and getting that process started. And the other is to spend the money now and move forward. I'm not sure that that's entirely clear in our motion that we have that choice between the two, and I wonder whether one or the other requires an amendment to make sure we know what we're asking on. So perhaps what I'm hearing is that Councillor Lane is suggesting that we do the immediate $50,000, up to $50,000 or around $50,000 expenditure, and ask us to determine whether that's our will? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I would make a modification that says we will do the 50,000 now and then continue with the work that's required for the,
To create a,
to complete the municipal drain.
okay,
We
so,
need to get people the relief right now, as far as I'm concerned, but
so do we handle that, Madam Clerk, as an amendment, or is that just a clarification of the motion?
No, that would be an amendment.
That would be an amendment?
Mr. Chair. And
Okay.
Could I just see the report back again?
Yes, by all means. So Councillor King, I think you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a question, and that is this an isolated case, or are we setting a precedent?
Who can answer that one? Mr. CAO, in your experience and wisdom, are we setting a precedent?
I defer that to the manager, or to the director of public works, rather, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mennel?
It could be. There's numerous, with the 3 rainstorms we've had this year, there could be all sorts of those sort of requests cropping up for immediate relief based on this sort of a decision, that there's a need to resolve a flooding problem that has occurred. And we've seen enough in public works this year. The calls have kept us pretty much running steady with respect to dealing with floods here and there, and cleaning out ditches and that sort of thing. So, it could be sort of the snowball effect, and carry on throughout with similar requests in the future.
Thank you. Councillor King, answers your question?
Unfortunately, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So, comments, discussion with regard to the amendment, that is the $50,000 option.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see the need to do something in this situation, but I also see a slippery slope starting. During this spring, we've seen flooding in places we've never ever seen before, and it's becoming more and more prevalent all the time with some severe weather events. Every time this happens, if we do spend money here on private property, we're going to have requests from a lot of other places. I predict that we will, and Mr. Mannel did say there's a possibility of this. Now, we went through a situation a few years ago on a property in North Pelham that was questionable as well over things that have happened, and I'm seeing a repeat here where we're spending taxpayer money on private property. That scares me just a bit. I say I have no problem trying to help these people to solve a problem. However, to use taxpayer money exclusively for this sort of just, to me, opens a door that may cause us some problems in the long run.
Thank you. One second, Councillor Lane, see whether other councillors have any comments before we get back to you.
Well, I'd like to hear from Councillor Lane, but I may have a comment later, but.
Oh, okay. No one else says other than me, and I'll get to it last, so.
I'd just like to make a comment that this is not just strictly private property that we're talking about. When the roads of Pelham get flooded, can get flooded for more than just this storm, I think it's an issue of the town. It's not an issue necessarily of these particular property owners. If we're flooding streets or roads in Pelham, I think that needs to take a look at. And I believe, if I'm if my information is correct, that this is not just this year type of situation. I believe this has happened with severe storms in the past, more than just this year. So I think we have to be careful that we don't isolate it down just to this year. And Mr. Manley can correct me if I'm wrong, and I wish he would if I'm wrong, that this has been a situation that's happened more than just this year.
Mr. Mayor?
Are we gonna hear if this is just this year, or?
Oh,
This has been, I think, a regular occurrence for a number of years. It's nothing new. Just the concern is that working on private property with this municipal, to put this drainage pipe in, I would imagine that first we'd have to see approval from the owner, whereas if you use the Drainage Act.
could you speak up?
Sorry.
Or into the mic? Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is using the Drainage Act to complete this work would allow us access to private property to do the work. There's certain requirements and obligations that once you follow this process through, that you can do the work, whereas if we start work on private property, we may have to first get permission, I would guess, from that downstream landowner. And it's not guaranteed that he would allow us to do that at this time. So having the Drainage Act as our backup plan certainly allows us to do that work.
Okay. And for clarification, what you're saying, Mr. Mantle, is that if we then go not with this option, but with the Drainage Act option, the municipal drain option, that's where we have the clout of the Drainage Act.
I think that's the better route to follow with respect to this this process. We can certainly look into as far as appointment of an engineer to see how quick a response we could get and report back to council on that. That if it's something that is going to take, as the drainage superintendent says, years, then maybe that's not the route to follow. But if it's something we can move through the process much quicker, then maybe that's the direction we want to go as opposed. And then we have that backup.
Yep.
With respect to the Drainage Act. There's no nobody delaying us. We may get so far, and the downstream owner says, "Well, I'm not interested in you coming onto my property." We may be sitting here next year at this time, going through the same discussion.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Mantle. Mr. Mayor?
I think that was, that would have been my question. Is there a way to fast track the best option? I think it's pretty clear that the best option is turning this into a municipal drain. And the point of the amendment is to try to provide some sort of immediate relief. For a whole bunch of reasons, why that has its challenges. We've also heard compelling, views to say, well, look, this has happened a couple of times and maybe more than that. So, I want to do it all. I'm sure we all want to do it all, and I think that's something that we have to balance off. To say, in the long run, this should be a municipal drain, and we need to move forward. But we don't even have approval of the downstream property owner to. So if we approve this, we don't even know if they're going to want to receive this water and put this drain and like. Maybe, Mr. Chair, somehow we need to move ahead on the drainage, which I'm hearing Mr. Mantle say they're going to get back and say, how quickly can we move? And then the second is, it looks like we need a little bit more information on this alternative. It's sort of, it's there, and we want to do it, but there's a lot of challenges with it, so.
So let me suggest this by way of process, because we've been at this for a while. We have motion for amendment, saying looking at the $50,000 immediate option. Let's deal with that one, and then let's fall then to making a decision with respect to the municipal drain option, which I think is what was in the recommendation. Does that sound fair? Any other comments then with regard to the amendment? We understand what the amendment is?
Just,
Councilor Pat?
if I may ask for clarification, the 50,000 would be funded how?
We would pay for that. That's my understanding.
Directly out of?
Where does the money come from? Madam Treasurer, where does the money come from?
Somebody gonna print it today?
The only recommendation I can give there is that we relieve 2 projects from being spent this year to help with some of the
So
drainage
you would
issues.
offset.
It would come out of there.
Okay, that's what I need to know.
So if there are no other comments with respect to that, let me call the question on the immediate $50,000 option. All those in favor? I have 3, 4.
I'm not clear on this again. We spend 50,000 now, but the object of spending 50,000 now is to incorporate it under the Drainage Act, is it not?
No,
It's not.
no. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, what the motion is that we go ahead with an expenditure of $50,000 unrecoverable to put a drainage tile bed on the west side of Balfour. That's what I understand this motion to be. Councillor Lane?
Yeah, well, it's to relieve the flooding issue. If that's what it takes to do it, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's what we're,
this report is saying. Right?
yeah, the report is saying that is one
Yeah.
option that we can do immediately. The other is to go through the Municipal Drainage Act and go through that process, which will include this, but as a municipal drain subsequent to, or pursuant to an entire process, as opposed to us deciding now and paying for it now.
Yeah, if I'm to understand it, it's gonna cost us $50,000, but the municipal drain, the rest of the drain, when it's built, will be funded as a normally municipal drain would be funded. I think that's the way it works, right? So if the whole municipal drain was to cost $400,000, for example, now it's gonna cost $350,000 that the other people are gonna have to pay. We're just paying $50,000 to solve an immediate problem.
Yeah, I think so that's the amendment as we understand it, is to go with the alternative suggested within the report, which is to approve drainage works to be completed on private property to construct an adequate outlet without the benefit of creating a municipal drain. That's what's in the motion, and that's what I believe the motion is, or the amendment is, that we do that.
Yeah, but I think the word you had at the end, without creating a municipal drain, is not correct, because eventually you will create a municipal drain.
True, but the 50,000 is not recoverable, and the work would have, that part of the municipal drain would have been done.
Just-
Councilor Durley.
This 50,000 will move water from point A to point B. Where is point B? Are we creating another flooding problem at the end of where this drainage pipe might be?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's a natural water course on the other side of the agricultural land, whereas the water does eventually end up at that location without, right now it just.
Go into a
causes
river,
damage.
stream, or similar.
I mean, there's other approvals and stuff that we're gonna have to do this as well, talking to the MPCA to have that approval and everything as well, to have a proper discharge and everything, so it's,
Okay.
it's not gonna be, tomorrow that we're gonna be able to construct, but there is some finer processes that we have to do, which, usually a notification could take 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes a month, just to hear from the other agencies.
Okay. So we put this pipe in from point A to point B, which is going into a natural water course.
Yes.
And that solves the drainage problem at 1941 Belfer.
That's what's believed to be
Okay.
the solution.
Now I get it. Okay.
Okay, so for clarity, with respect to that motion, all in favor? And therefore that amendment is carried. So how do we deal with this, Madam
So
Chair?
the amendment is carried, so now you need to have a motion to receive the report.
Right.
And approve the recommendation as amended.
So the motion then, going back to, from the amendment, the initial motion as amended, which is to receive the report, and, what did you just tell me?
Proceed with the motion as it's just been amended.
And proceed with the motion as amended. All in favor? And that's carried. This is carried as amended. And you have those notes, right?
Chair, just a comment.
Yes.
I think it would have been helpful, I know we had a report, I was looking for it, we had a map of this area, we had photos, et cetera. I couldn't find it on my, quickly as we were discussing this. I think in future it'd be helpful to have location maps, what's being proposed, what the alternatives are, et cetera, so we can point to it, understand it a bit better. It may have sped up the conversation that we had.
Yes.
And, helped us identify what the facts are, what the issue is, what the problem is, and how we might solve it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the message has been heard. I thank everyone for participating in that. That was an interesting discussion. Moving on. A move by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Durley, that issue summary report, event emergency management plan policy be received, and that the Policies and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that the event emergency management plan policy be approved. Comments and questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is extremely important, and we just spoke about weather events. I guess just some questions. Does this comply with provincial laws and guidelines for tents, et cetera? I was thinking about our conversation last year regarding Summerfest and the change that they made in terms of the stage, maybe get a better stage in case something happened, et cetera. So just for clarity from staff, does this meet all those guidelines? But
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ravensway. Please.
The template is a general template that each event would have to be filling out, and as they are, as it's completed, the necessary approvals for each, for instance, the tent, for those regulations, we would have to make sure that they do comply. And in each case, it would be different. So what we're approving is a template that basically touches on all aspects of running the event. And the template may change as time goes on and the regulations change. Actually, the chief just notified me that there's a couple of changes that need to be made on the template. That's why it is appended to the policy, so that it's usable on a daily basis, and we're able to enforce that there is a event emergency plan in place for each event that takes place, particularly on our lands. And I know that the fire services have used this particular template for private lands as well.
Thank you.
thank you. I appreciate that answer. And then the other is, and I think again back to Summerfest last year on the Friday night, where we had that inclement weather, and I know that some of the participants, members of the Mayor's Youth Advisory, didn't get some sort of signal to say, wait a minute, the outdoor movie night is canceled or going to be postponed or whatever it is. I do note that in this, in terms of weather planning, it says that an all clear should be declared. So just, should we, I had my fine tooth comb out, I guess, for this, but should we make it shall be, must be, communication, every effort made, et cetera, to communicate? Obviously, as I read through this, it was pretty clear that communication is one of the key elements. Even the way in which to communicate with people, don't say hurry, et cetera. So maybe just a response from the director on that. Does that need to be stronger?
Thank you, Ms. Van Ravensway.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It could be stronger. We could change it so that it must be communicated through different sources. That could be one of the changes on the template.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Pat?
Very quickly, I concur with the mayor, because the other overlying thought behind this, Ms. Van Ray, is the insurance liability and the exposure that people would have. And if it's not clearly indicated, and we heard this at the conference last week, people don't understand what's going on and things do take place, then we open ourselves up. So you hear me say it all the time: immunize, 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 and then it ensures that process works. I can tell you from, and if Councilor Kersey was here, we did use this template for the Supperfest, and it went very well. And we did, just as you say, we did, some applied thing to the Supperfest committee, some didn't. So it was a pretty, how can I say, it was good flow-through, and then we all understood what would happen in case something took place.
Other comments? I have one just for clarity. To whom will this policy apply? Is it the events hosted by Wellness and Recreation, or?
Every event.
Through you, Mr.
Or,
Chair. To you.
Through me, to me?
Yes. It would apply to anyone that would be using municipal
Okay.
facilities, parks, anything. And I will throw it over to the fire services, the chief, to comment on anything else.
To you, Mr. Chair, this actually isn't, it's not a legislative requirement, but under, in the Act, under 280, it gives us the authority to impose emergency measures if we deem there might be a life hazard. So if you're gonna put 3,000 people in a park and have a big concert, we have to take the responsibility to impose these safeguards. So the emergency plan could be 1 page, it could be 20 pages. It all depends on the magnitude. You're downtown, you're around buildings, you have, cooking, you have whatever, you have fireworks, you have stuff like that. We do with private lands, Bissell's, when they have their concerts out there, we enforce, we have them do an emergency plan just in case something did happen. So really, it's up to us to say, we require this. Nothing says in writing, like, there's no legislation that says you shall have an emergency plan. Gives me the authority to request it.
And what would trigger your conversation with Bissell's or whomever when they're planning an event? Is it looking for a particular permit, or?
Well, they have to apply to the clerk's office for an event.
For the event permit, okay, so that's what triggers it, that's how we know who, okay. It's not, if I'm having a small family wedding in my backyard, that's not, this is specific for events for which permits are requested or events that are hosted by the town itself.
And that are kind of unusual or create some unusual circumstances that could lead to.
But how would that be triggered? How would you know?
Well, the event permits, anything the town does. If someone's gonna rent some municipal, Harrow Black Park, if somebody wants to come in and run a big concert at Harrow Black Park, we're gonna know about it. So one of the safeguards we'll have is that we can impose to say, okay, part of your rental agreement or whatever is you have to do this.
But private events held on private property for which no permits are required, we wouldn't know, we wouldn't be looking at it. Okay.
Just liquor permits.
Yep, liquor permits. Okay. Other questions or comments before we call the question? Question, all in favor? And that passes as recommended. Thank you. Next one. It's been moved by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King that issue summary report emerald ash borer related treatment removals be received for information. Discussion, comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recall back a couple of years at an AMO conference, we spoke with the Minister of Natural Resources, I believe it was Madeleine Mayer at the time, and we were asking for some funding for a caterpillar that was eating leaves on our trees.
Gypsy moth.
Gypsy moth, that's what it was. And we were told that the ministry has money put away to save trees, but the gypsy moth isn't a problem because all it does is strips the tree of leaves and it doesn't kill the tree.
Yes.
They were putting money aside for the emerald ash borer. And that money was there and it was refused to us because they were putting, and it hadn't hit us yet, but it was going. I just wonder if we could make some contact to see if there is any money available there in that in that fund. And if there is, then maybe we could take advantage of it, because there's a substantial number of trees that need to be removed because they're dead from this borer. And in fact, if there is some provincial funds that are left over from the fight against this pest, then if we can take advantage of it, certainly it would be to our advantage. And that's just a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've never known the treasurer to pass out free money, so I'm sure that will be something that will be pursued vigorously.
Yeah, I recall that conversation vividly because it was.
And we don't require an amendment to do it. No, I'm advised that we don't really require an amendment to add that to this, but the treasurer apparently is on it. Other comments? Call the question.
Just in terms of this, so the funds for this? So right now, what's being recommended is that we receive the report just for information. So we're now aware that there's some trees there, that some work has to be done in the order of 87,000, is that correct? So if we accept this recommendation, what action will occur other than the treasurer looking for funds from the province?
Who wants to tackle that? Mr. Mennel?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll budget in 2015 for the additional work. Like, there's a certain amount of tree maintenance that has to be done one way or the other. Like, trees are always dying. This is an additional cost to our regular tree maintenance programs, whether it be tree planting, tree inspections, or the removal programs that we have. So this is additional monies that will have to be allocated in 2015.
Okay. So when I think about this, I think I've had some folks talk to me about some trees that they perceive might be an immediate threat. I've passed them along and put them on public service request, et cetera. But are there any others that will be dealt with that are immediate threats to safety for ice storms, winter storms, wind, et cetera?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the staff are working on the ash trees constantly. Highland Avenue is a perfect example. A number of them, of trees up there had to be removed this week, last week, simply because they're near the hydro lines. They're the only ones that are up there, I think, is just these ash trees, and they're all around the hydro lines, so they need to be removed. They're dead or half dead, and to let them go through the winter probably isn't a wise idea. Any of those that are immediate hazards are being dealt with right away. Ones that we can that are back out of the way, that don't pose an immediate threat, we're leaving them till later on. But it's more the urban trees that are being dealt with first.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity. That's comforting, that the ones that are potential immediate threat, they're being dealt with. The others will put off, and then we can budget in 2015 to deal with them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. It has been moved by Councillor Durley and seconded by Councillor King that Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue summary report transferring administration and enforcement of the sign bylaw 3310-2012, and that the chief building official be directed to prepare a revision to sign bylaw 3310-2012 to reflect the proposed changes as noted in the respective issue sheet for consideration at the September 15th, 2014 council meeting. Questions, comments?
Thank you. So this is just simply transferring the administration. It's nothing to do with what we spoke about earlier about potentially including signs in site plans. Is that correct?
The planner, I think, wants to respond.
For clarification purposes, through you, Mr. Chair, the authority would be to transfer to the fire chief or his designate from the chief building official, which it is now. We also contemplate in the report coming to council to add a recommendation that signs be approved through site plan who have already gone through the process, thereby eliminating this extra step for applicants to therefore reduce the red tape and roll the red carpet.
Thank you. So that will be part of this when this comes forward, is what you're recommending?
That's correct.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Call the question. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor King and seconded by Councillor Durley that the issue summary report regarding the proposed hiring policy be received, and that policies and priorities recommend to Council that policy S30107, hiring as amended, be approved.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Papp?
I understand that it has gone through legal counsel and we've reviewed it all. I guess the question I have is more of a, I don't want to read too much into this, and maybe I'm being, on the second page where it talks about if the most qualified candidate is a family member of a town employee, the town will make every reasonable effort, to ensure that a direct reporting relationship does not exist between the family members. Help me with this. Is that because under current legislation that we cannot discriminate? That if in fact the qualified candidate is in fact meets those credentials? Just to help me, because I heard this in AMO too. This came up. And I'm just curious because before I always understood it, and help me around, that there cannot be any kind of direct reporting relationship between, let's say, a husband and wife, or the one's a supervisor, the other's employee. So just help me with that, if someone could answer that for me.
Madam Treasurer?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason that it says to make every reasonable effort, because the size of our municipality, if a reporting structure occurred while two employees were working here and one became a supervisor of the other, we have a duty to accommodate. And they must be accommodated in a similar like function. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the court system over it.
Right.
So that is what the verbiage that our legal counsel wanted us to put in here. You're going to make every reasonable effort to do it. You want to make sure there's no direct reporting.
Right.
By simply stating it doesn't make it law, because the law will override the policy. But we just want to make sure that that everyone knows that that is our intent, is to make that effort.
Councillor Papp?
Yeah, I just, at that session, this came up, but it was more with the federal department, where there was a husband and wife. One was a supervisor, the other one reported to them, and it was an interesting case, but it was just, but there was definitely, how could I say, case law that basically said you can't just, if they are the best candidate, you cannot turn them down, and if they met all the requirements, met all the prerequisites, and the complaint was from the Canada Border Services that, no, we cannot have any kind of relationship, and the argument before the courts was that I guess that's why you've made every reasonable effort, and if this is the only way that it can happen, that's what'll happen. So I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The line above that, about family members of town employees will be given equal opportunity during the recruitment process for any position. That to me sounds like sort of no worse treatment. And I think where council was going is we wanted to make sure that there was no better treatment. So does this also say sort of no better, no worse? We're just saying equal?
Madam Treasurer?
Yes, it was just to clarify the nepotism part of the Human Rights Code, and strictly bring out that the family members of employees would be given the equal opportunity. And it's similar to what's said on the previous page under the human rights legislation. We just wanted to further clarify family status in relationship to employees.
Okay. And this applies to who? All employees? All recruitment?
This applies to all recruitment.
Okay. Including summer students, temporary employees, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a change that the CAO would be involved in whether a position is posted internally or externally. I think that was before I was reviewing the policy recently. It was for the department director, I guess. So, you know, I'm in favor of the change, just looking why that was changed.
Madam Treasurer?
Thank you, through you. It's actually a process that we've always used in-house. We never actually just decided on our own arbitrarily to decide that someone was qualified and post the position. We would always go to the CAO and ask for that permission to do that. So, you know, detailing the case of what qualifications are there and so forth. So we just cleaned up the policy to go with the way that we've been operating in-house.
I'm glad to hear that's the way we operate. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions?
Just, I was mentioned before, and I know that the CEO and the treasurer, that this interpretation of family, what I heard this week is, so what we traditionally think it is, it's not going to be the same, but it hasn't gone through the legislative process, but it will, how can I put it diplomatically, it'll alter who constitutes a family and who would be considered appropriate. So it's something we'll have to be keeping a careful eye on. So Hickson, like I said, they've got that all mapped out, and I was just sitting there thinking, oh my God, all the implications of this, depending on, but as a small organization, it could impact us. Depends on what nature of that is. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and I guess it's the same one that Councillor Papp asked, and I just want to ask it again just for clarification. So in the event that most qualified candidates who are applying, I guess, are family members, every reasonable attempt is going to be made to accommodate one or the other to ensure that there's no conflict? Or to ensure what exactly?
That's exactly correct. Some of the examples given by the legal were that if someone was to come in and they are a family member, and there's a way to make them report to someone else, and you can change that structure, then you could still hire them and just change the reporting direction.
And if you cannot?
If you cannot, you have a duty to accommodate. So you can't simply not hire them because you can't accommodate that. You could hire them with with the knowledge that you may be able to create a reporting structure. And sometimes it's done as simple as an example that Sarah was using with me from our legal firm is that, if they have someone come in and they, for instance, in a school board, and they wanted to make someone a transportation manager, the most qualified candidate was actually the nephew of the person that they'd be reporting to. So they changed where that reporting structure went to another department. So that was their way to accommodate, and those are the things that we would look at.
That's right. But then my question is, if it cannot be accommodated, then is the answer that we will go ahead with the reporting relationship or that we'll hire somebody else? Which of those two answers is it? If you cannot accommodate, I think, for example, hypothetically completely, but the CAO is everyone's supervisor. And the most qualified applicant for a position may be his son. There's no way to accommodate a reporting relationship not to exist. So which way what's the fallback position? Is it to create the reporting relationship between the relatives, or is it to move on to another candidate?
We would not be able to move on under human rights legislation. You would have to accept them. If they went through the interview process.
So that's the state of the law
yes.
today?
That's
Okay.
what it is.
Yeah.
If that's what it is, that's what it is. I'm just debating myself. Any other questions or comments? Then let me call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Nancy. It's been moved by Councillor Lane and seconded by Councillor Durley that the issue summary report council appointments to committees be received and that staff be directed to examine and reformat the committee terms of reference to reflect the creative problem-solving process used by the town of Pelham, and to remove the appointment of a member of council to the committees, and that the terms of reference clearly delineate the role of the committee as either an advisory or working group function. Comments and questions? Councillor Papp.
So that I've not more cobwebs than I have. I'm clear on this. So right now, I sit on the Supperfest committee, and so we would not be members of that committee. Is that what this is saying? Just so I'm trying to simplify it.
Yep.
Using the Amanda Lang approach from complex to very simple, what would happen? So like if, Mr. CEO, if you could explain it to me, I'd appreciate
CEO?
it.
The recommendation from staff is that no counselors sit on any town-appointed committees. There's a difference between a committee and a board. So, for
Right.
example, counselors would be appointed to sit on the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera.
Sure, that's understood.
Those are board appointments. But for committees of council, the role of the council is to receive the advice or the recommendation of a committee, which is largely an administrative function. So in the case of the supermarket would have its existing membership without the two counselors, and recommendations would be made to council for final decisions. And that's the way that all the committees should work as far as our recommendation to council goes.
So that would include Summerfest, Supperfest, I can't think of it,
Beautification,
communication,
beautification.
the Maple Acres
Communities in Bloom.
thing, is that,
It could, yeah.
you know
Because
what
that's
I'm
not
trying
a,
to
sorry, Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
Maple Acres is a bit of an anomaly. It's more of a working group that was established as part of an action plan. It's not really a committee of council. But
No, I hear
if you
you.
were to set up something like Maple Acres Advisory Committee, no councilors would not sit on that. It would be a staff appointment, and the recommendations to council would come from that committee chair.
Councillor Papp?
Oh, I guess, well, no, I guess I'm trying to put it at a higher level. Our job is to govern. And to develop those things through the committee structures. I'm curious to see what my other members say. I mean, I agree that when it comes to certain administrative things, just myself, I stay away from it, because that's staff and the volunteers' responsibility to do these. Except we've had a tradition where we've had counselors sitting on things that it may be accepted that they're, that's their role. This would basically separate that role from governing the stuff as opposed to actually being involved in the development of action plans. Is that basically, Mr. CEO?
Mr. CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that's exactly the point. We've seen conflict that's created as an unintended consequence of appointing a counselor to a committee. For example, if it's a working committee where they're actually doing something, like Summerfest, and you've got a counselor there, their role changes from governance to administration or staff, and then we have instances where a counselor is making decisions as a council member that maybe not the appropriate way of doing it as far as council decision making, because you have to do it as a whole. The other part gets into when you have counselors on a working group particularly, or another committee, they start to give direction to staff unilaterally, and that creates conflict as well. So there's a number of reasons why we recommend that council not be involved in the committee process, and rather elevate themselves, as you say quite correctly, to the purely governance role.
Councillor Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the CAO, this is going to create an overtime situation for a lot of staff members, is it not?
No, we hope not. Actually, I should say no, it won't, because we have a very good internal control and balance and overtime, and we use flex time, for example. So if an employee, a lot of these committees will require senior level involvement, which, as you're aware, doesn't receive overtime. Or if it's a staff person that's been allocated to perform a function on a committee, then we use flex time. So if you have to work late on a Wednesday for a committee meeting, you come in later on Thursday morning, that type of an arrangement. So we do keep that well under control.
Very good, thank you.
You've met Kerry, right, Councillor?
Other comments or questions?
So, I guess the template we're using for this is the Architectural Design Committee, right? So we're getting advice from that group, a very large group, actually a cross-section group that we put together. Staff are getting that advice, members of the community are there, etc. And then, they always say the buck stops here. So the buck stops here with council. So eventually those recommendations, if it's going to be to spend dollars or whatever, those are coming to council. Is that correct?
Mr. CEO?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So when we think of some of the other committees, I'm just cycling through these from the previous. So Canada Day Committee, they had a council rep years ago. They haven't had one in, oh, they do have one. I forget.
You're looking
I'm
at it,
sorry.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Communities in Bloom, Heritage, all these committees, but not boards.
But not boards.
Okay. I think it makes sense in terms of the involvement of council. It seems to work on the architectural advisory committee portion. So, and given where we're at as a council and recognition that we make decisions as an entire body, as opposed to one-offs, whether it's the mayor or councilors or individually or whatever, that it comes back to this body. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Other comments or questions?
Well, just picking up, Mr. Mayor, what you're saying is there's also the elephant in the room is the undue influence that can occur. And when you hear about how you can shape or form the direction of certain activities, it can be either very positive, I'm saying for our purposes, or sometimes it could be considered, for lack of a better word, ultra vires, that we're stepping outside of our role. And that can be dangerous and can put us in a position where we're vulnerable to, breaking our own policies and procedures that we don't want to see happen. I think the adoption of this will be fascinating to unfold, because basically what we're doing, all of us as council members, will be stepping away from all of these operating committees, for lack of a better word. And we will only be dealing with those that are the policy, or whatever you want to call it, the procedural specific recommendations that we need to approve, for whether it's funding, changes in procedure, whatever that case may be. Now, the question I had is, Mr. Mayor, are you you sit ex officio on the architectural committee? I can't remember.
No.
No, you don't. That's right. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. So really,
There was, if I might, Mr. Chair,
By all means.
in previous committees
Yeah, there was
that
an
we
ex
had for
officio
facilities,
position.
there were ex officio roles for the mayor, but voting roles for councilors.
Yeah,
Maybe that's what you're thinking of, Councilor?
That's correct. That's what I was thinking, and I guess the other point, I don't want to be deliberate, is that we have to always, and I've talked with some of us before, the impartiality and arm's length has to be there, has to be seen that way, because then, people misinterpret. So, I mean, as much as I enjoyed the work on the Supperfest committee, and same thing with the Pelham Seniors Advisory Committee, technically, I sit there, but I mean, I'm not a voting member, so I would rather deal with it at a governance level than be dealing with it at an operational level. So I understand fully.
Others? I have I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
No, it's going to change the subject slightly, but to the same matter, but go ahead.
No, I want to just make a couple of comments on this. I'm really supportive of this. I too believe that we ought to be hearing what the recommendations are and acting on them. And I'm mindful of the fourth goal in our strategic plan, which is to encourage residents to participate in decision making. And this gives them a forum to really participate apart from us, and then bring us their suggestions that have been developed from within themselves. But I'm also aware that participation in committees doesn't come naturally to a lot of folks, and that when you're looking at putting together the report that ultimately is going to come back here, I wonder whether some thought couldn't be given to the roles of the various participants in a committee, and in particular some sort of, well, for want of a better term, a charter for resident members to know, to have an expectation of how they would be treated, what the decision-making process is, how the communications are going to be made, a variety of things that perhaps aren't generally known by the residents that are chosen to come and participate, and who might become disappointed if discussions don't occur exactly the way they expect them to occur. I put together some ideas. Perhaps I can give them to whoever's going to draft this, but it does rather seem that the decision would be a good one, but then the nature of
Point of order, Mr. Chair. There are terms of reference for every committee, and that outlines just exactly what you're saying. So everybody who's there knows the terms of reference, and in fact, they are informed as to what they do. So what you're saying is sort of redundant to that, because we do have that all in place.
Thank you, Councilor Durley. And one of the things I think that would be in there is that there would be an expectation, a legitimate expectation on the part of committee members that terms of reference would be the guiding form of that. Because it isn't always, and it creates some level of frustration in some that it isn't. I appreciate that it ought to be, but it doesn't come naturally. So perhaps that's something that can be considered. Mr. Mayor.
Jared, can you just give us an example? You said you're going to share that with others, and we should probably all hear it. Are you talking about sort of notice of meetings and
Notices?
circulation of minutes and those kind of things?
That's right. I mean, I know, for example, of terms of reference that will indicate that meetings will be held monthly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, and then the members say, but we're supposed to be meeting monthly. So it's just that sort of thing. Something to indicate that if people are going to be participating in the committee, that they, very early on in their life on the committee, have some direction, perhaps some training as to how it is that the committee is going to function. Mr. CEO.
Point taken, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure that's a function of the terms of reference as opposed to it being a function of the orientation and recruitment.
Fair enough.
And I think that that's the more appropriate place so that, A, people have a very clear understanding of what their role and responsibility is on a committee when thinking of applying, and then once appointed, what their role and obligation is moving forward for the term of their service on the committee, which that part is largely as a function of the terms of reference. So I think that's probably what I would recommend as far as how to deal with that.
I don't disagree, Mr. CEO. Councilor King?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I was going to take it actually a step further, I mean, committees are volunteers. It's tied into a volunteer appreciation. So, it's one thing for us to sit back and say, well, these are the expectations of committee members. But at the same time, there needs to be almost a protocol around what do we give back to the volunteers. It's not just what we're going to take from them. It's a partnership. So that's just my comment in terms of development of a volunteer program.
Thank you, Councilor King. Mr. Mayor?
Just to build on what Councilor King is saying, which builds on what you're saying, it sounds like those expectations need to be laid out. So if you're, and if we don't meet the expectations, then there has to be sort of some, we apologize, whatever. So if I'm part of a committee, I can expect that the agenda will be circulated when, that the minutes will go out when, those kind of things, the notice will be at certain periods, so that all committees are the same. They may meet monthly, they may not, they may need to call the chair, that's for the terms of reference, but what I think we're talking about is expectations of service. We have a certain expectation in terms of our procedure bylaw, 72 hours notice for a meeting, da-da-da-da-da-da, whatever it is. It may well mimic and match our procedure bylaw, but, I'm very often aware of times when some of these, especially some of the working committees or ad hoc committees, they don't operate in this way or haven't operated in this way. So whether that needs to be a separate, Councilor King is suggesting, policy or framework and dealing with citizen committees, or whether it can be captured in a procedure bylaw, I think it would be helpful to have it enunciated, those expectations. Here's what how we're gonna deal with you. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. Mr. CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to build on the mayor's comments, I think there's two things. One, that the clerk is working on a guidebook for appointees and staff to committees, so I think that will help. The second point is that on a committee where there is no staff assistance, my vision is that staff are not participants on a committee. Staff are resources to that committee. And as a resource person, the staff is responsible for doing the agendas, for setting the meetings, for doing all of the administrative work to allow the committee to focus. So it shouldn't be a burden on the volunteers to have to do that administrative tasking. And I think that's where some things have perhaps fallen down a little bit. If we look at the Recreation Advisory Committee, we've got one staff resource that is going to be dealing with meeting dates and minutes, and then other staff resources who are providing technical or expertise to the committee, but are not voting members and are not participants in the overall discussion, if you will, or recommendations to council. So again, I see the value of having staff resources on these various committees.
Thank you. I think that subject is pretty well exhausted, and I appreciate your understanding with respect to the need for the volunteers to have an understanding of their role. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. So I was going to change the subject, just on the same sort of general subject, but that is, the CAO spoke earlier about a board and said, well, you know, this is what we're doing, but not for boards. So maybe there needs to be some sort of comment, at least in the document that comes out of this. Here's how we deal with boards. So just so it's clear, again, dealing with expectations. So I'll let you consider that. And then the other is, as I think was talked about, the CAO mentioned about appointments. And I think council received a couple of meetings ago sort of some suggestions from the library board, a matrix on how one might look at candidates for that, et cetera, for sitting on that particular board. So how do we deal with the appointment piece? Is there a matrix that we have, a checklist, or whatever? Is that part of this, or you know, that's going to come to us? How does that work?
Mr. CEO, do you respond to that?
That has changed the subject, Mr. Chairman, and I don't believe it's something that's contemplated in this particular recommendation.
Okay, perfect, not germane, thank you. I don't know if other colleagues wanted to be part of this. I'd like to hear from them if they do.
Yeah. Councillor Pat?
Just very quickly, as along those same lines and get to the, for example, and I'll give the example, I've been on the chamber, but I'm not a voting member of their board. I'm an appointee. I'm limited in what I can do in my scope. So anybody that takes my place and is appointed by council would need to understand that scope of responsibilities and culpability. So anything that goes wrong, let's say, with the chamber, and where we're vulnerable, then you immunize. The difference in that is when we get into things like Councilor Ribbiak's an appointee to the Airport Commission. The Citizens Committees brings out a whole new scope of area of how they are going to understand, and didn't want to go down, but I know we'll deal with it, is they don't need to understand how vulnerable and culpable they will be to their actions in whatever directions. And what I'm getting at is you diminish that they think they're going to be held fully accountable or be blamed. And I only use this as an example is the committee that's dealing with the multifaceted community center, that's a huge multi-million-dollar project. So the ultimate decision is us, but those people that sit on there basically should understand what they're going to be dealing with. And I'll just generalize it, and how far they're going to take it. Or down to the smaller committees, which will deal with whether it's Summerfest, whether. So I think that's a very well taken point, so that they don't, again, I use the word immunize, they don't feel that they're going to be held, because I've dealt with citizens and volunteers before, they think, okay, you're going to, something goes wrong, you're going to blame me. So I think those things need to be addressed, and I think especially what you made a good point about the boards and what the other thing that came out, and maybe you heard the same feedback, is when we do those appointees to the board, and we'll deal with this, is there somewhere, are we obligated? And I can't answer that because I'm not the legal background to say, do we respond back to those who applied if they ask why I was turned down? And I just heard this recently. And I was curious because how that whole, I mean, I've been here long enough and I can't tell you what it's sort of hit and miss, but maybe that's something that also needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. Councillor Pat, you're talking about committees as opposed to boards, I think. The committees to which we would have our residents.
You have your residents appointed to certain committees, right?
Yeah, you're not talking about the boards that we're.
No, not the boards, but I'm also distinguishing that from a point of view, even us as councillors, you have a voting responsibility at the Airport Commission, whereas myself at the chamber, for the best example, I don't vote on anything. I cannot vote. I can't participate. I really don't set policy or direction. I sit there as your liaison, basically, in a nutshell. That's what I am.
Mr. CEO.
Mr. Chairman, I might recommend that this be, maybe council provides some direction for us to look into the recruitment and selection of committee members.
Yes.
It's not something we've given a lot of thought to. Maybe we can come back with some policy recommendations for council to consider.
Great, so I would.
I think there's
yes.
consensus around that. You've got that.
That's, would be very helpful.
Yep.
And as I think you mentioned, our clerk is working on a manual, and I think that will take care of the other piece. So I think you're good.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Ready to call the question? All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Lane and seconded by Councillor King that this regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular committee scheduled for Tuesday, September 2nd, 2014, unless sooner called by the mayor. All in favor?
Bad, even before.
Carried.
Al, don't be hurt.
Did somebody fall asleep back there?
Okay, I'm okay.
Okay.
I'll pull a wheel on his wheelchair.
Our emergency plan will swing into effect immediately.
Council, we do need to consider,